breaking down the daily habits, processes, and tools of high achievers. Now, here's your host, Brad Wilson.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Process Podcast. This is your host, Brad Wilson. Before we jump into the show, I just want you to take a couple seconds to reflect and contemplate clicking that little subscribe button in Apple Podcasts. It's such a pretty little button, right? I can just imagine you guys in my mind's eye having a picnic at the park, playing card games at your kitchen table like best friends. The subscribe button always lets you win, of course, and then graciously cleans up after itself when your day together comes to an end. So I want you to take this opportunity to spend a little bit of quality time getting to know both the button and myself. On today's show, I have with me Scott Myers. Scott's been a screenplay writer for the past 31 years, and for the past 10 years has been blogging on his website, gointothestory.com, where he's created an unfathomable 24,000 blog posts and receives more than 1.5 million visitors each year. If screenplay writing is something that you'd like to know more about, check out his blog, gointothestory.com. In the 80s, Scott created and sold a spec script to Universal Pictures for more than a couple doll hairs, which was then made into a feature-length film, Canine. As a young man, Scott graduated from Yale University with a theology degree, but decided to put that on hold to follow his Bliss, which at that time was creating music. And that's a common thread throughout my conversation with Scott, living a life that's true to yourself, the hero's journey, following your bliss. In our interview, we go through Scott's personal hero journey from military brat who loved the movies, to musician, to a stand-up comic, to screenplay writer, to blogger, and then to professor. I feel very grateful and blessed to have had this opportunity to speak with Scott, and it's my great pleasure to bring to you my conversation with Mr. Scott Myers. Hey, Scott, how's it going, sir?
Going well, thanks. How about you?
Feeling good. Looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, great. Looking forward to it, too.
So the first thing that I wanted to ask you about is your childhood. Could you tell me about your childhood interests and sort of what led you to first divinity and theology, and then secondly, towards writing in the movies?
Well, I was a military brat. My father was an Air Force colonel, so we moved on average about once every 3 years all over the United States. So there's an upside to that in that you meet a lot of different people and different cultures. Some of the transitions were rather stark, like going from California to Alabama during the George Wallace years and attending a segregated school, which was shocking to me. And then going to North Dakota after that. It's just like literally these kind of whiplash experiences. And my dad was in what they call Strategic Air Command. So that was the bomber pilots. He was a B-52 pilot. And so he took me to see B-52s, and he took me down into missile silos. Where in North Dakota, they had all these missile silos. And I saw the big map on the wall with all the planes flying in the Soviet Union and whatnot. And you tend to think about things like death a little bit more prominently when you're a child and you're involved in that kind of atmosphere. So, and that my family was also quite religious. So I was interested in things like the meaning of life, why are we here, that sort of thing. As far as writing goes, I was always a reader. I read tons and tons of books. And I remember writing short stories. I was very interested in politics. I wrote a short story, I think, when I was like 7 years old during the 1960 presidential campaign, just in a goofy, like Animal Farm with animals running for president and whatnot. So in between the time of reflection, or just sort of reflecting on life and then wanting to kind of write about it, eventually I got a guitar. My parents got me a guitar, and then that set me off into songwriting. And so that really became my principal form of creative outlet, creative outlet. Later on, I was like 14 when I got a guitar. So I guess that's it. I mean, I just, being an Air Force brat and traveling around as much as we did, and meeting all these different people and going to the different places, and just having that kind of heavy knowledge every day when you see your father in a uniform and whatnot, and you hear planes flying overhead all the time while you're living in an Air Force base, you tend to think about things a little bit more seriously, I suppose, than maybe a normal person would.
Well, I grew up in Tennessee. Back in around 2011, I started traveling to Los Angeles and also the Bay Area later to play poker, because I'm a professional poker player. And I can say that even in recent memory, going from Tennessee or the South to Los Angeles and California and the West Coast is still very, very, very different, almost like different worlds.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I remember living as a teenager in California in the late 60s. We were living in Riverside, Southern California. And of course, that was the counterculture era. And then my dad retired and we moved to Virginia Beach, Virginia. It was like going back to Leave It to Beaver world. I mean, it was just, again, a lot of these whiplash experiences. You learn to cope there. One of the things I found interesting was that you have to make friends very quickly. How do you do that? What I learned was you are curious. You ask questions. People love to talk. And so I became good friends with a lot of people, at least as far as their experience was, because I would just say, hey, how you doing? What's going on? And I think that's actually, for a writer, a really great technique. I mean, we do that it's like the key to understanding our characters is getting curious about them and asking questions. It's also just a great life skill. I remember when I sold my spec script Canine back in 1987. We were meeting with my agents, my writing partner and I, for the first time before we went out into town for all these meetings. And one of them said to me, remember this. He said, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And so when you go into meetings, don't feel like you have to talk. If you listen. And I think part of that was just that the people, and they know that people like to hear themselves talk, and so anyhow, I think that, all those whiplash experiences, moving these new environments, just trying to find one's footing, that's a really great life skill. I tell people all the time, you learn to listen, get curious about other people.
It's interesting that you say that, because I interviewed a guy, Marley Lunt, and he talked about, when he was 19, he was so shy that people would ask his mom, if he could talk, if he was capable of speaking. And when he was in college, he carried around a didgeridoo. And he didn't do it for any other reason than he was meeting up with a friend later on that day because they were going to play music together. But carrying that didgeridoo around was an icebreaker that opened up the conversation. Yeah. And that's what broke him out of his shell and got him talking to people.
Interesting.
When was the transition from playing music to, exploring a different art form and writing screenplays?
Well, it's a circuitous route. I suppose it's worth some explanation on it. I went to the University of Virginia undergraduate. I was going to major in political science, but I couldn't get into a class my first year. And so there was a class, Intro to Religious Studies, World Religions, and I took it and I really enjoyed it. Of course, I had a religious background. And so I ended up switching majors into the Religious Studies department. And the first year they offered an honors program, I got into it. And one of the books we read was The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. And I didn't understand a lot of it. It's pretty academic. But I did get the gist of it, this idea of follow your bliss, which is that's really the theme of the hero's journey. It's about characters go on a quest, an adventure. They have all these complications and tests and trials that result in them being a transformed individual. They end up in a transformed state. That transformation is about finding something that's inside themselves. It's there. Campbell talks about the hero's journey being the journey of reattainment, not attainment, of reattaining something. And so that's finding that bliss, he also called it your rapture. Well, that stuck with me. And so I ended up going to Yale Divinity School. I was going to get a PhD, but I was playing music at the time, and I'd been playing since 14. And I knew that was important to me. And my last year at Yale, I remember driving up to campus and just feeling this literally physical sensation in my gut that I was not supposed to be here. Part of it, I think, was just there was 7 straight years at school, but part of it was this gnawing sense that if I don't do anything with the music, I will regret it. So I took off a year, and that became the rest of my life. I played music in Aspen for 2 years, Aspen, Colorado, through a set of change. Campbell talks about if you pursue your bliss, the universe will open doors where there used to be walls. And just a series of people I met along the way who invited me to Aspen, where there were a lot of musicians there. And so I played professionally for 2 years there, and then moved to California. And at some point, someone said to me, "Hey, you're really funny," because between songs, you do banter with the crowd. And I'd also been interested in stand-up comedy, comedians when I was young. So I did that for 2 years. It was crazy. But that led me to discovering screenwriting, where one of the club managers was actually going to the USC Peter Stark School for film producing. And his script that he needed for his master's had been optioned out from under him. So he just jokingly said to me, "Hey, could you write a screenplay? Or maybe you could write a screenplay." I said, "I can do that." Should say that I've been watching movies my whole life. I mean, when you're in an Air Force base in North Dakota and there's nothing to do, and you, for 35 cents, can walk a mile over to the movie theater and go see a movie. I just did that a lot, and just on TV and whatnot. So I knew a lot about movies. I'd taken some cinema classes at UVA. That's how I got into screenwriting, was just, again, you think of it and say, well, it's coincidence or whatever. I tend to think of it being more serendipity, fate. If you look back on it, you can see it. All these different people I met, places I went, things I did led me to that point. And that's when I discovered screenwriting. And really, for me, that was just like, this is what I want to do.
Yeah, that's so awesome to me. And I think about like fate and serendipity, because I've had these experiences as well. And a lot of people that I've talked to have. And I think when you're following your bliss like that, your sort of spider sense is aware of opportunities as they come at you in life. And I love that, you're so courageous in pursuing the things that you're passionate about, because I'll just segue into this. So I've recently made a public goal. I want to reach 1 million people in the next year. And I want to help people live a life that's true to themselves, because that's the number one regret of the dying. And there's nothing more tragic to me than somebody getting to the end of their life and being like, I didn't do the things that I was passionate about that moved me. So yeah, that's super awesome. Where do you find the courage to follow those passions? I mean, did you have people trying to talk you, trying to change your mind? I mean, any resistance?
Well, I can remember my parents, the look on their face when I said, well, I'm going to leave divinity school and go pursue music for a year. And they were like, what? I'm going to get my master's and then, take a year off before I decide about doing the doctorate. They probably regretted the day they bought me that guitar. I don't know. Courage, I guess. I just have, I grew up in an era, it's different than for young people nowadays, where the economic considerations are so extreme. I teach college, undergraduate and graduate students now at DePaul University, and I taught at the UNC Chapel Hill. And so, since 2008, I've been interfacing with young people quite a bit in an academic environment. And their situation is so different than mine when I went to school. I don't ever think I thought about a job when I was in college. I was there to learn and explore and have long conversations with friends about the meaning of life and that sort of thing. So I feel fortunate in that respect. And so that became my North Star, was just what's authentic, And I found I could make money, living very frugally as a musician. And I found I could make money as a stand-up comic. I was doing 300 gigs a year for like 3 years in a row. So, and if you live frugally, you can scrape out a living that way. Campbell, I think you're exactly right. Joseph Campbell said, there's nothing more tragic than a person, I'm paraphrasing, climbing the ladder to success only to discover they're on the wrong wall. And I think that's true. I mean, the first thing I did when I got into my office at DePaul 2 years ago, the very first thing I did, I had a whiteboard on the wall, was I picked up a magic marker and I said, quote, "Follow your bliss, Joseph Campbell." It's still there. So anytime a student comes into my office, that's there, whether I talk about it or not. Or when I'm up there diagramming their story, they're seeing that up in the corner. I want them to at least think about that. That, yes, the economic insecurity of our current climate is huge, but there's got to be something that's part of your authentic life. And whether it's an avocation or vocation, you have to pursue it. We have one shot. And so, in terms of courage, I guess it takes courage, I mean, if you do it as an avocation, that's great. It's a hobby. Writing, building closets, sewing, whatever, something that's you're passionate about. If you do that, that's just going to bring more joy to your life. It may not, if you choose to pursue it as a vocation, particularly in the arts, it's so competitive. The odds are enormously against you, but you have to go in with the mindset that you're doing this because you love it and that it brings you joy. And if you do get financial success, great. But you're going to get a larger measure of success because you found some purpose in your life, something that aligns with what you're really passionate about. So I guess it does take courage, but more than that, I suppose it takes just recognition, an introspective nature where you can just get in touch with yourself and find that thing that you're passionate about and do it.
Yeah. So when I was 19, I decided I was going to be a professional poker player, or that was my aspiration, which in the year 2003, poker was not as mainstream as it is today. And my family's very religious. There was some backlash as far as me making that decision, but I realized that what I was doing didn't feel like it was working for me. I wasn't happy. I had taken a year off from school because I never really enjoyed school personally. I was pretty bored and it just didn't resonate with me, and poker did. And I had the thought to myself too, if everything falls apart, I can always just come back home and I'll try to do something else, but I'm really glad that I took that risk. I'm glad that I didn't listen to anybody who was trying to talk me out of it, because it's given me the life that I have now. And that bliss, I think, with that career is sort of winding down, and now it's moving on to finding bliss in the next stage of life.
Campbell talks about how the hero's journey is just not one experience; it's a series of cycles, And so, when you play poker, what is it? Is it like just the excitement of it? The every time you play, it's a different set of players, different set of cards. What is it that appeals to you about that?
So when I was 19 years old, what appealed to me was, for one, I'm a competitive person, and competition's something that I've been a part of my whole life, playing baseball, wrestling, all sorts of sports and stuff like that. But poker is a mental competition. It's it's a battle of wits and going deep in decision trees and thinking logically, getting in people's head. And there's a lot of empathy involved in sort of understanding how they're thinking so that you can create a counter strategy. And all of that mental warfare very much appealed to me. And I remember the first time that I played, I had this sense of there's a lot of depth here. I can see the depth. I don't understand it, but I know it's there. And that curiosity as to finding the depth and getting there was really, I was fascinated and obsessive. And that was sort of what led me to poker.
Interesting. So in a way, I guess there's a parallel to a writer in this respect, that as the characters emerge in a story, you're trying to assemble them in kind of a map, trying to get a sense of how they relate to each other and what their respective functions are. And I would imagine as a poker player, similar things. Like, you got to quickly assess this person, this person, this person, this person. You said empathy. What's their personality? What are they most likely? How are they most likely to respond to situations? Is that kind of a fair parallel?
For sure. And it's an information collection type of situation where you see what people are doing and you hold that information in your head. And then when it applies to you in a situation, while during a game of cards, you apply what you've learned. So it's like an ongoing process. And, when you're playing against guys that are on a similar level to you, you get this like leveling game where, you're trying to basically just trying to outthink them and outplay them. And, it was a really fun game and really fascinating to me as a 19-year-old. And it was a lifestyle where, I have a high level of autonomy. I'm kind of anti-authority. I don't want people telling me what to do. So that appealed to me. And
you were making a living doing this.
Oh yeah. I've made a living. Poker's been my primary income for the last 14 years.
Wow.
So sorry, I don't mean to talk about myself. I didn't mean
No. I was curious. It's interesting. As I say, I'm like, people are fascinating to me and
for sure. Yeah. So I want to get back into screenplay writing. And so as an outsider, you managed to create and sell that first speculative screenplay to Universal Pictures, and you made a lot of money. Firstly, was that the first spec script that you had created? And secondly, how'd you manage to sell it to Universal?
That's a complicated story. It was actually the third script I wrote. The first one was when the first script I wrote was when the club owner who was going to the USC producing school asked me that question. Hey, maybe you could write a screenplay. And I said, I could do that. And so I wrote one. Of course, the standard thing, advice to writers is, write what you know. So my first script was called Stand Up. It was about a comedian who goes out on the road with a veteran comic, very well-known comic, who is got some substantial psychological issues, got a manic depressive. And so it's a kind of a drama comedy. Which was, an awful script. It had a lot of my comedy bits in it, stand-up routines in it, but that's par for the course. Your first script is just not going to be that good, I don't think, unless you're Diablo Cody who wrote Juno, and I think that was her first script.
Wrote it at Starbucks, I remember.
And then I wrote a second one with that person, the club owner. He's now my writing partner. And then the third one was Canine, which is very simple, high concept. This is 1986 when I was writing it, and it sold in 1987, January, when buddy comedies were hot and high concepts were hot. And the idea was very simple. You could sum it up in 6 words, loner cop, new partner, police dog. And people subsequently, when I was meeting with people in Hollywood, they were, wow, that was really genius. You guys took 48 hours and put Rin Tin Tin in there, because Rin Tin Tin was at one time the biggest star in Hollywood back in the 30s, I think. I hadn't thought of that, of course, but I went, yeah, sure, absolutely. That was exactly what I was thinking. What happened was my writing partner, Steve, he was working as an assistant at 20th Century Fox. So he's the only person I knew in Hollywood. He just so happened to be, working there. He'd gotten an internship and then was working as an assistant. And so that script, he slipped it to a couple of executives there who gave us some feedback on it. And I rewrote it, and then we submitted it in December. And I remember how naive I was. I wrote it, we had to print it out. We didn't have PDFs back then. I wrote it on an Apple IIc with like 5.25-inch floppy disks and a dot matrix printer that took like forever to print. And then, FedExed it down, or whatever FedEx was at that point. I don't even know if it was around then, and I wrote in a letter saying, if Hollywood doesn't buy this, they don't know what they're doing. That's how naive I was. I literally confident that somebody would see this. Anyhow, It was in. I remember driving down. I was going to go work for another 6 weeks doing stand-up comedy. I took these breaks between doing gigs and writing scripts, and so this was now after I'd written the script. I was going to go and do 6 weeks of stand-up down in L.A. And I got on the phone in King City to call him, and because I knew that they was going in for a weekend read, and it was on a Monday. And he wasn't there, but then I called my wife and she said, Fox wants it. So it was at Fox. We got submitted to Fox. And then at the meeting, supposedly the head of production said, I hate this script. And he came to our script and said, love this script. Well, there's a whole circuitous thing where they made some claim that because he was an assistant there, it was theirs, their property, and got into this legal mishigas. And finally, the head of the studio said, well, let me read it over the weekend. I'll see whether we want it or not. And because they made like a low ball offer. And then he said, no, we'll pass. And so by this point, everybody in town had seen the script. When a spec script is hot, it's a small town, really, the development community. So it went around, and I remember it was like, I think on a Wednesday at noon, we were in the producer's office, Larry Gordon, and we were going to be fielding calls at noon from all these people, and people were calling up. Sherry Lansing was calling up, and all these studio execs before the noon call. And then my agent Dan Halstead walked in into the room and said, "Universal wants a preemptive purchase for a lot of money." So that's how I got to Universal. It just been everybody around town had seen the script, and once something gets a little buzz, then because it's a small community, it has a way of bubbling up, and we were very fortunate in that regard. So,
how did it feel to have all these different companies competing for your script and being relatively new to the game like that?
I've actually, because the way I would write back then was I had this beat up old Ford with no air conditioning, and I drive up and down. My wife was at Berkeley at the time, so Cal. And so I was living in Northern California, but doing most of my comedy work down in Southern California. So I would be driving up the Interstate 5, sweating profusely, but I'd be working out the story beat on this microphone, one of these big ones, not the micro cassette ones, but this cassette recorder. And so I was used to talking, while I was driving. And so when I was driving back and forth, I was staying up in Ventura at a friend's house, in the Thousand Oaks in a friend's house, sorry. And so I drive up and down PCH or 101 to go to these meetings and whatnot while all of this is going on. I've actually got tapes of all the whole thing. It's like, it's all there. It was quite exciting. It was also kind of embarrassing because I drive onto the lot of these studios with my car, this beater car, and everybody else is driving Porsches and whatnot. And the guy at the yard would look at me like, seriously, but I didn't have any money. I had, because I've been cutting back on my stand-up gigs, I was really, balancing out, trying to write this script. And it was exciting. It was very exciting. And you meet these people who talk a different language than normal people do. They got all these buzzwords, and they're very big personalities. And you're, being offered all these things. Like this one producer said, yeah, we'll get, Schwarzenegger to do it. And my father owns the ski resort, and we'll get you free passes. And meanwhile, he's eating all these peanuts. He's literally not offering us any peanuts. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. There's some sort of metaphor there.
Yeah.
So it was quite exciting. Of course, I was a movie guy, and I didn't know anything about Hollywood, but I knew a lot about movies. So, it was very exciting. It was also, very confusing because it is a different kind of a lifestyle. But we moved to LA, and that started that. And I was very fortunate in that between that and selling a pitch to Warner Brothers and then getting an overall deal with Warner Brothers for about the first 4 years or so, I was getting paid to learn how to be a screenwriter. I was very fortunate that the script we wrote was serviceable enough with a strong enough concept that somebody deemed it worthy to buy. But I really didn't understand writing nearly as well as I needed to. So for those first 4 years, continuing on, I just watched every movie and read every interview book that I could with screenwriters, or went to all the meetings and whatnot. And so it was quite exciting, that whole period of time.
Just immerse yourself in the process.
You have to. The competition is fierce, and you've got to immerse yourself in all aspects of it, and just dive in,
I can imagine that being a movie guy and, you sell your script, it gets made into a feature film. How did it feel seeing it on the big screen the first time, the thing that you had created?
It was, again, obviously exciting. The first rule of Hollywood is that everybody gets rewritten. And so that was our case too. We ended up with sole credit, but the material was shaped considerably. So a lot of the movie, you recognize as being your own, and a lot of it is like written by other people. So there's a bit of, ambiguity there with, I think, any screenwriter who's gone through that experience. But knowing that we came up with the idea, I'll tell you what was actually more exciting than the premiere. I mean, the premiere was nice. I mean, it was great. There was, it was heavily marketed by the studio. I mean, they believed in it, and it did quite well. It was the number one film, at the box office domestically for a week, and then had a couple of sequels off of it. But the best feeling I had actually was when I was down in San Diego for some of the shoot, the production in 1988. The first day where you're there and you see all these people, and there was 100 plus people working on this project. And I remember Steve, my partner, turning to me and saying, you realize that none of these people would be here if we hadn't come up with this and written this script. That's true. And that's an amazing thing about being a writer. You create something out of nothing. And where I think that may not get the respect it deserves in Hollywood, I think that there's a certain amount of people there that are jealous of that ability to generate stories and write stories. It's a powerful thing. And that really became clear to me when, literally this gaffer over there is making a living for his family right now for the next 12 weeks, or 8 weeks for the shoot or whatever, because of what we created. And so that was actually quite exciting. Of course, the interesting thing, like William Goldman says, the first day for a screenwriter, the most exciting day in a screenwriter's life is the first day on a movie set. The most boring day in a screenwriter's life is the second day on a movie set, because it's all just setups and you're waiting and, but that first day was great.
Awesome. So in my previous conversations that I've had with, one was a talent manager, Emily White, and another one was an Olympic champion, Adam Creek. And we talked about sort of a hangover effect that occurs when people reach the pinnacle of the endeavor that they're pursuing. Did you feel any of that once you had that first success?
Oh, I never really looked at it like that. I felt extremely fortunate to be in the position I was in. And, if you're talking pinnacle, you're talking about, in the screenwriting trade, it's those, what they call A-list writers, the Tony Gilroys and William Goldmans. And
so there was always a bigger goal.
Yeah. I mean, I was always just trying to learn, at first, for the first 5 or 6 years, absolutely. And then you're just trying to get work, because, it's you're working freelance. Once I was out from under that overall deal with Warner Brothers, I was, a freelance writer. And I had times where it was extremely busy, like 3 movies at one time, and then doing some script doctoring here and there. So you're mostly just, it's like a job, This is what I try and tell people. Yeah, it's, you may be able to do it and sitting around in shorts outside by a pool, at your writer's house, writing partner's house, and the weather's beautiful, and you go to premieres and parties and stuff, and so you can see Hollywood stars every so often, or you see them at Gelson's when you're shopping at the, the grocery store or whatnot. But it really is just work, So I never really had any sort of a hangover. It was really more just, it was always a combination of just excitement about doing it, knowing that, but then the day-to-day of working up, coming up with story concepts. That was one thing. Like every day I would be constantly thinking about, and still do, not as much, then I move more into academics, but still do look for story ideas. They're out there. And so that's part of the job, and then grinding out pages, when my writing schedule then was always the afternoon, 1 to 5. It was, I had a little numeric thing, 1 to 5, 5 to 7. It was either 1 to 5, 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock, or 5 to 7 pages when I was pounding out a script. If I got to the 5 to 7 pages by 3:30, then I'd say, okay, I'm done for the day. Because I figured that, there's really not much more that you can do qualitatively, as from a creative standpoint. 5, 7 pages, I think, is pretty good output for the day. But no, I didn't have a hangover. I had some hangovers after the parties, but
right.
Not a lot of that either. But yeah, I was always it was a combination of that kind of excitement and just doing the work.
Awesome. So on your blog, you've written you've 24,000 plus blog posts.
Yeah.
What does your daily process look like as far as creation nowadays with the blog?
Well, I started it 10 years ago. I was in LA, wrote 30 commission projects there for feature films and for TV, every broadcast network except for ABC. I didn't write anything for ABC. I did for NBC, Fox, and CBS. Then I got invited by a friend who started a production company in the East Coast to come and work as a TV producer. And so that's what I was doing. But I wasn't enjoying that as much. I wasn't finding as much, wasn't as aligned with my passion as movies were, I found. So I started a blog 10 years ago in May 16, 2008. And the idea was just to do multiple posts a day, basically an extension of what I had been doing for years, which is tracking the trades and movie news and TV news, Hollywood news, and also immersing myself in the lives of screenwriters and writers and creative people, and then just reflecting on it, having a forum to talk about it. So I was doing just like 4 or 5 posts a day. It was pretty easy. I type really fast. I think fast, and blogging was very natural for me. And back then, blogging was, I think it was pretty popular, kind of growing in popularity. There was a terrific blog that John August, who's a very, very talented screenwriter, he'd started in 2004. But it was what I was thinking was a little different than what he was doing. Mine was having more updates, like during the day, 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 2, 4, 6, so people could kind of stop in during the day and find a piece of inspiration or an analysis of a script or a piece of news, a spec script sale or whatnot. So I've scaled back a little bit. I only do 5 posts a day now, and they all go pretty much in the morning, and then I just schedule my tweets and whatnot after that. The way I operate is I do it at night. I take about an hour and a half. At this point, there's certain patterns. Like every day, I do a daily dialogue. I just have done that every single day. I've posted every day since May 16th, 2008. I haven't missed a day.
How do you remember the date, the birth of your blog? Just how your mind works?
No, because I think it's because I just recently had the 10th anniversary, and I knew it was coming up, and so I just kind of locked into that date and remembered it now. So, I didn't really expect anything. I didn't know what to expect. My vision for it would be that hopefully it would become a resource for people and have a lot of content, which is absolutely the case. It's got a lot of content. There are over 100 subject areas there with archives, with tons and tons of stuff. So anyhow, I have a pattern of things that I do. On Mondays, I know that I've got an on-writing quote, so I'm always looking for like an interesting quote from a writer about writing. On Tuesdays, I have Screenwriting 101, so I'm always looking for screenwriters who talk about the craft. I do things like script to screen, where I compare a screenplay to a scene so people can see how something gets translated from the script into a movie. I do a business of screenwriting every Thursday, and then Friday writing in the creative life. So there's these series that I do ongoing, and then I'll just fill in with things that happen in the news. When I moved to Medium, like 2.5, 3 years ago, the transition was pretty smooth, except for a lot of the formatting got messed up on a bunch of the posts. So what I figured that I would do starting about a year ago was I would repurpose some of these old posts that people hadn't seen.
Because they can't find them. 20,000 posts deep. Yeah.
Yeah. So I started repurposing them, thinking, well, maybe if I clean them up, and put photos on them and fix the formatting and whatnot, maybe people will still be interested. Well, actually, my site traffic's gone up. Interestingly enough, it's now, last year I had 1.55 million unique visits, and I think this year it's on target to be 1.8 million unique visits. Wow. So, it's not ginormous. I did get named the best script writing website by the Writer's Digest, their 20th annual 101 best websites for writers.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's nice. But yeah, it's just a thing. And once you get into a habit of doing it, and one of the reasons why I do it every day is, I hope that writers get the subtext. Write every day. You just do it. So I do that at night. I'll, write my own creative stuff as well. I'm a late night person, but I just, an hour and a half, basically, I get it done.
And I love that it's like what we talked about before. You have your target, you have the things that you're going to be writing about. And so your focus tends to go in that way. And when you notice it, boom, you just follow through on your process and it gets done.
Now, I'll tell you, there's this idea of the spec script, in Hollywood, which spec is short for speculative. It's like you don't write it for pay. You write it out of your own passion for the story and to, create a story that you think will have some commercial value. Maybe someone will option or buy it. But there's this thing I've talked about on the blog, the spirit of the spec. It extends beyond just writing spec scripts. It's like if you have an idea and you think it's interesting and you have passion for it, well, create it. Put it out there. You got to do the work, put it together, make it come into existence, and then have the courage to put it out there. And the blog is a perfect example. When I told my friends that I was going to be writing this content and putting it up there for free, they all said, well, that's crazy, Scott. Why would you do that? And in part, I would do it because it just felt right. But in part, I would do it because there are a lot of people out there in the screenwriting online universe there are some people who I think are talented and good teachers and whatnot, but there are a lot of them that are, I think, they teach it, screenwriting, they approach it in a very, very formulaic way, and they charge a lot of money for it, and they're these scam artists and whatnot. So I said, well, I want them to know, people to know they can come to my blog and get, they can either take my advice or not, but it's here for free. Well, that seems counterintuitive, right? But that's how I got discovered by Franklin Leonard, who heads up the Blacklist, which is the premier screenwriting brand in Hollywood. And we had many conversations back in the day, 2010, I think it was, 2011. He just reached out to me because he said, I love what you do. And we had a very synchronous view about what we were attempting to do, educate writers outside of Hollywood, to provide opportunities for writers who were outside of Hollywood and didn't have the traditional means, like going to film school at USC or whatnot, to get a way in to Hollywood, to understand how the town works, and to bring that understanding to their writing. And so that's when I became the official screenwriting blog of the Blacklist. And that's been terrific because I'm kind of a part of I don't get paid by them, but I'm kind of part of their educational outreach. They do these writers labs, and I've done every single one of the feature writers labs that they've had. I'll be doing the 12th one, I think it is, in just a few weeks in Los Angeles. And then another thing that happened was I got a call 4 years ago from Brad Riddell, who was on faculty at DePaul University School of Cinematic Arts. And he said, hey, I love your blog, and would you be interested in maybe teaching at DePaul? So we talked about that, and at the time it wasn't a perfect opportunity because my youngest son was just starting high school and where we were living in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. But then an opportunity arose 2 years ago, and Brad came back to me, and I came up and applied for the job. And I said to him, I said, well, look, if I get this job, just one thing you have to know, I've got to continue the blog. And there was a pause, and Brad said, well, Scott, that's one of the reasons we want you. so, there are times where you follow your passion. I was just really passionate about doing this and creating this thing. And then these doors open, the Blacklist, DePaul University. I am now more well connected in Hollywood than I ever was when I lived 2.5 miles away from 20th Century Fox because of the blog. I've interviewed hundreds of writers and filmmakers. I go to all these conferences and stuff now, all as a result of, well, not all, but a lot of it as a result of the blog. So, for your listeners, if there is something they're passionate about and they think could be of value, there could be something there's an audience out there for, then, I encourage them to at least give that a shot. They would have at least tried something, and that, that's better than not trying. That's better than living with the regret of saying, well, I wish I'd done that, but I didn't,
That's really an awesome story. And I think there's a lot to be said about giving generously to the world. And like you said, there are maybe some, hucksters, I don't know, the charlatans out there who are charging a lot of money, not delivering much in the way of value. And when you have a blog that's, effectively a free resource, you don't have much to gain by putting the information out there. So there's this natural trust factor that people have with you. And like you said, that opened a lot of doors and, sort of counterintuitively made you more well-connected than you were before.
Yeah, I wasn't anticipating any of that. All I was anticipating was create a conversation with writers who were outside the system and aggregate content that could be an ongoing resource. That was really it. But everything else, that came off of that, or it still comes off of that, I didn't foresee that at all.
Yeah, right. And, I feel like your passion was helping people that were, like you said, outside of Hollywood and getting started in their screenwriting careers. I mean, that's very commendable. That's awesome story. So I guess segueing from that, what's a common barrier that prevents people from realizing their potential, and what steps do you think they can take to overcome said barrier?
Well, I guess the first thing would be just to recognize, have the awareness of what their gifts are, their talents are, their bliss is. If you don't know what it is, if you don't have an awareness of it, then it's likely you won't find that path. Joseph Campbell talks about, if you're on a path that's been laid out, that's probably not your path. That's something that someone else has laid out for you. And so an awareness of where that path might be, what that path might be, is the first thing. Then the next thing, obviously, to take those steps. Even that first step. And that can be challenging. Again, we live in a very uncertain economic time, so I understand that. And by no means has my life been the easiest life. It's been, I think, fair to say, it's been pretty authentic. So you said courage. I think it takes a certain amount of courage. You have voices of negativity. Writers deal with this all the time. You're no good. This story stinks. Why did you think this story was any good? Well, who's going to buy this? Nobody's going to buy this. It's a constant thing that you'll hear. Well, you need to recognize that that's a companion. You're never going to get rid of them. You can have a conversation with them and say, well, you know what? I'm going to set you over here right now, and I'm going to just claim this because this feels good to me. And so, I think just first thing is just awareness. And then the second thing, understand that there may be a path that you're not aware of. There may be a way of doing something that you can't quite foresee. But if you put that energy out there, and I know it sounds kind of new agey, you put that energy out there, you make those steps, things happen. Carl Jung talks about synchronicity, where you get an alignment with you get an alignment with who you are. Jung says, become who you are. That part is already in you. It's like in The Wizard of Oz, when Glinda, the good witch, says to Dorothy at the end, she says, Dorothy, you had the power to go home. You just had to go and learn about that, essentially. That's not a direct quote. That power is inside you. Your bliss is inside you. That thing that will enliven you and enrich your life. And it's there. Everybody has some sort of God-given talent, innate talent, or talents. They may go from one to the next. But just be aware of it and then take those steps. It's scary. But even if it's an avocation, keep your gig, keep your job. Don't, quit and just leap. Though some people may find they need to do that. But I think you'd be surprised. The barrier is more internal than external. The barrier is not often the thing out here. It's you. It's your sense of confidence. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That the barriers, most of the time it's our internal resistance. I don't consider myself a writer, but earlier this year I created a book, and I hired an illustrator. It's basically a guided love journal for couples. It's like a date night activity type of thing. And mortified the whole time. I finally get the tangible book in my hands after doing all the, bajillion steps that I had to do as far as like writing the back cover copy and getting ISBN and setting everything up. I get the tangible book and I'm like, okay, now what? Like, now I got to sell the thing, right? And I sent it to some people and just, I was mortified. So I'm not very good at sales copy. So I sent people to my sales page and they read it and they were like, I don't get it. Okay, well, what if I send you a copy of the book? And so that happened with one company, and I sent them a copy, and it's turned into this thing where now they're going to be buying like 10,000 units. And I was just mortified the whole time, thinking it's not going to be good enough. They're going to hate it. Nobody's going to like it. People are going to laugh at me. But that hasn't been the reality of the situation at all. And I think it would have been fairly easy to get to the end of the journey. And as Stephen Pressfield says in Do the Work, not shipping, not having the courage to, publish and then try to get it in people's hands. So,
that's like that spirit of the spec is that the next to last step is you put it out there. One thing that comes to mind off your story there, and congratulations on the success of the book. That's great. I mean, that's very much in the spirit of the spec. You don't consider yourself a writer, but you have this idea for a book. You put it out there. But one thing that people can do that's actually kind of it's probably both smart and it's in the safety zone for them. And that's just study, do some research, whatever it is you're interested in, immerse yourself in it. You can do that, online, books, interviews, friends, people in whatever area of expertise that you're interested in. So you'll learn more about it. And therefore, that can maybe give you a little bit more confidence to take that leap. But, here's another thing too. Here's a perfect example. So I was going to write a script about 3 years ago, and something happened in the public. It was like the news that blew that project up after I'd been developing it for several months. And I was so frustrated by that. It just made it mean I couldn't write the script. It just wouldn't make any sense. I had this comedy that I'd been sitting on for a long time. And so I went on my blog and I said, all right, I'm going to just take November. NaNoWriMo, which is this thing where you write a novel in a month. Well, they used to have a thing called Script Frenzy, which they did for screenwriting, but then they stopped doing it. So I said, okay, so I'm just going to take this month and I'm going to write this script. I don't even have it. I always work from an outline. I didn't have it outlined. So it was a real, kind of a leap for me. But I said, invited people to come along. Anybody else want to write this thing in the month of November? Write fade in to fade out. Just get it done. And it evolved until we had over 1,000 people who did this. It got translated, picked up by IndieWire and translated into Spanish and other languages. All these people who jumped on it. It became known as the zero draft. This is not my phrase. It's just around. Not the first draft, the zero draft. It's not about getting it right. It's about getting it done. And so now I've started a Facebook group that's, I guess back then, because they asked, could we have a Facebook group where we were talking about this, called Zero Draft 30. And it's a great community. It's like 3,000 people at this point. We're trying to keep it small, so it's in the same spirit of the type of positive-minded, attitudes that are present and go into the story in my blog. But the zero draft thing, I think, is really great. I've had people. I had a woman email me who said, "I'm crying as I'm typing this to you. There's a script I've tried to write, like." Over 10 years, I've been, started and stopped. But because of the Zero Draft 30 challenge, I did it. And that's just, I've had dozens and dozens and dozens of people. In fact, some people I've written scripts that have gotten them representation. It started off as a Zero Draft 30 script. So lowering your expectations, telling the perfectionism, there's a time for you. At the end of the process, when we're going through and looking at each word and making sure that the verbs are strong and the descriptions are great and the dialogue sings. But up front, that first draft, it's like Obi-Wan, go with your feelings, just feel your way through the process, get in touch with the characters in each scene and just write what you feel. And don't worry about the quality. You're just trying to get from fade in to fade out. By the time you get to fade out, you will know so much more about your story and your characters than you did at the beginning.
I think the imminent deadline of 30 days is a huge component towards people getting it done. Do you have a system set up for accountability within that group as far as stating their purpose and stuff like that?
Yeah, we do it now twice a year. We do it in September and March. And so between the Facebook group and there's a Twitter feed, ZD30 script, and then my blog. And so every day I blog something on it, some sort of inspiration, a quote or comment, a tweet that someone says, and they get like an award. They'll get some kind of fake, not fake, but it's based on a screenwriter, just this little thing. It's a motivational tool. But yeah, people will create, again, it's very much crowdsourced kind of thing. The people in the community will create a calendar every time. And with, we hear mark down stuff and we have these, it's kind of silly, but for some reason, the kind of animal spirit guide for us is a hamster. I don't know how it happened, but so Scamper the hamster is this thing. And we do what most people ever do, writing sprints. They'll say, okay, I'll do a writing sprint at the top of the hour, 1 hour, go. We do writing scampers to have some fun, with it. And so we do these things every Friday during the challenge, a 24-hour writing scamper-a-thon, so that there are 24 hosts around the world, Friday through Saturday. And, each hour, someone's going to be hosting a writing scamper. I started off every time we've done it. And so, and people can go in and just join in. There's someone on Facebook will say, okay, it's now hour 3 and it's my turn. And I'm on, boom, and off they go. And then they come back at the end and say, all right, good job. I got 5 pages done. I'm now handing it off to so-and-so in New Zealand, and off they go. And so that's the kind of spirit. It's fun. We try to, the reason we do it on Friday and Saturday is to make people write on weekends. Don't take a day off. You can, even if you just write one scene on a Saturday or Sunday, at least you're continuing that thread of creativity. So the zero draft is a great way. It was sort of embrace imperfection. If you think, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to rewrite this at the end because it's not going to be perfect. Yeah. Well, if you tilt your head a little bit to the side, you go, wait a minute, it doesn't have to be perfect. Oh, that's great. So I can just have fun with this and kind of explore and check and see what comes out of the creative process, as opposed to thinking that every single word has to be right. So zero draft, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I love that. I'll for sure going on my show page and, in the show notes, anybody out there that's interested or has had a screenplay in your head that you just want to get out, that sounds like an amazing resource to get it done and take some action. Scott, have you ever strongly believed something only to reverse course later on And if so, what led to that change of belief?
Well, I will say that there have been many first drafts I've written where I got done with it and realized that the story I wanted to tell was different than what I'd first thought. And that's a little challenging because, you come up with an initial instinct, and sometimes it's the purest version of a story, but sometimes it's simply a step to get you to the story. And so I don't know about belief. I may say, well, I believed, the story was, but then after people having read it or whatnot and saying, no, Scott, actually, this is more interesting. So that's a kind of an ongoing thing. I don't, honestly, I don't know.
So I'll say when you're talking about developing awareness of your bliss and your passions and stuff like that, I think that's something that people should spend more time on are their beliefs, their specific belief systems.
Oh yeah.
Why they believe, what's the reasoning, right? Like if you're like, say, in Tennessee, lots of people are Christians, for example. Why am I a Christian? It's a question that people don't ever ask themselves. Because my parents had me go to church, because my parents told me to do it. But, I think people should live authentic to themselves and have their own set of beliefs. So regularly questioning the things that they believe, I think, is a pretty essential part of that process.
Okay, I see where you're coming from. Yeah, absolutely. I believed I was going to have a life in academia. That's what I was going to do. I was going to get a PhD and become an academic until I felt this thing inside and talked with my friends and talked with faculty and decided it best to take a year off. So that belief changed, Now, ironically, I then thought, well, I believe that I will never get back into academics. I believe that I'll just be, and now here I am, an assistant professor at DePaul University School of Cinematic Arts. So yeah, but what you're just talking about there is really to the heart of the hero's journey, what Joseph Campbell talks about. That the character, he says in a great series, it's called The Power of Myth, an interview series, 6-part interview series that Joseph Campbell did with Bill Moyers, and I believe it's on Netflix now. I'm not mistaken. In the very first episode, he does a wonderful distillation of the hero's journey. It's very simple, maybe about 2 minutes long, but it says the essence of what the hero's journey is about. And he talks about the hero at the beginning, saying they are just making do. They need to change. They're just making do. They've cobbled together, and this is my language now, they cobbled together a set of behaviors and beliefs, coping skills and defense mechanisms. So it's a life, but it's not their authentic life. And so the call to adventure, or what in Hollywood they'll call the inciting incident, that's not just random. That's for them to go on the specific journey they need to go on. And so if you look at all the events in movies, the events that happen, the characters the protagonist intersects with, there's a way in which you can look at that you flip the sort of normal way of thinking about story. That those events and those characters actually service and support the protagonist's journey. That this journey is the narrative imperative. It's the only journey they would set to go on. It didn't start 2 days ago. It didn't start 2 weeks from now. It starts right now with this call to adventure. And what it causes the protagonist to do is to deconstruct their old ways of being and their beliefs, which will enable them to then get in touch with that need that's inside, that authentic part of them inside. It's no longer being suppressed and repressed by what they used to think and believe. It's now able, for the language of Carl Jung, come into the light of consciousness. Carl Jung said that our job, he called it individuation, our job is to get in touch with all aspects of our psyche. I'm paraphrasing here. And the psyche is the totality of our psychological state. It's memories and emotions and passions and instincts and things we repress. And he calls the shadow, the kind of the dark negative impulses. We need to shine a light on all that and become aware of it. Then if we don't, he said, the universe will create circumstances which compel us to. And that's the protagonist's story. They're living an inauthentic life, call to adventure is not random. It's going to send them on that journey so that they get deconstructed. Now they can reconstruct into their new self. And then at the end, the big climactic moment in the movie, psychologically speaking, what that is that's a final test to say, have you learned what you're supposed to have learned? Have you moved toward unity from disunity? And so what you're talking about there in terms of questioning beliefs, that's really in harmony with what the hero's journey is. And people can do that just in the, reflecting on their lives. They don't need to go anywhere. Your journey can be a psychological and emotional one.
And I think a lot of times we have instincts too, like you had when you were like, I need to go do something else. I need to pursue my passion, pursue my bliss, and listening to that instinct, even if it's just something's not right, start evaluating what is it that's not right. Looking at, like you said, deconstructing the actions that you're taking and the things that you're doing, and finding out what it is that's not resonating with you and fix it, or find out what's going to resonate with you and pursue it. Yeah.
That goes back to that very first point about awareness.
Right. And I never got a chance to ask you, but how do people go about cultivating that awareness within themselves?
Well, it's extremely hard nowadays because of social media and the connectivity, and I'm as bad at it as everybody else. Because I'm online, like I'm on a computer or online, like constantly. That's an inhibitor. So I think you have to have a certain amount of intentionality. Like, for example, it's not a lot, but last year I read daily these poems and reflections, and then this year every morning I start off with a poem, and just to be thoughtful. I exercise, so run, and that's another time. But I'm just prone to introspection, so it's maybe easier for me. But I guess, you do have to be intentional and look at your life, reflect about your life, and say what's working and what's not working. Really in many ways, you talk about your parents and how you were raised in a religious family. I was too. That's what much of our life as adults is about determining how much of that we were raised with and are living with, either in a positive way or a negative way, or trying to get away from. And in trying to get away from, we're still connected to it because we're trying to get away from it. That whole sort of conundrum about what our parents were about and finding our path. And that's, again, the hero's journey. When Campbell talks about going into the innermost cave and confronting the dragon oftentimes is representative of the old way, the parents' way. You got to find your path. So there just needs to be a certain amount of awareness. And I think it has to be some intentionality. Maybe instead of spending an hour clicking through the internet, the latest cat videos, take a walk and think about some of these things. I'll tell you one thing I did when I was in Aspen, when I was first there, was I got a yellow legal pad, and this is, very left brain, and I just literally listed assets, academics, music, positives and negatives. And I had this list, and ironically, the list was much more positive for me to do academics. I mean, the list was much longer on the academic side. Like, it made more sense. But as I would walk around Aspen, going through that process, I just knew, no, I got to stick with the music. So, however you get there, you got to get in touch with that gut and at least take some baby steps in the direction of pursuing that, I'd say.
Awesome. I love it. I love the listing, the listing, getting out of your head so that you can look at it and then see how you feel about the list. Regardless of what the list said. Like you said, your list pushed you towards academia, but you still went with the music. But seeing it on paper and thinking about it, brought more awareness naturally to which decision was going to resonate with you more.
Yeah, it somehow facilitated the instinct to come out more than the rationality.
Yeah. So if you could remind people of one truth on a daily basis about the world, what would it be? I hate to sound redundant, but follow your bliss. I mean, that's that. If
if every person in this world, if we were, in an ideal world, every one of the 7 billion people would be in a situation where they had some relative degree of comfort and support and education, and just the freedom to think about and feel what it is that excites them. And they pursued that. Can you imagine what this world would be like if every single person was doing what they were passionate about and had some talent for and gave them joy? So follow your bliss. It seems simple, but it's profound. I start every class and end every class I teach with the same 2-minute thing, right? Follow your bliss on the thing. And I say, what is your bliss? It's you identify that which energizes you, which you have talent for, which enlivens you, which you feel may be of some value to the world, and follow that, whether it's a vocation or avocation. If you do that, then you're much more likely to find purpose in life because you're doing something that's aligned with who you are. And, I don't think there's a bigger lesson than that.
I think that's amazing. And like I said, living a life that's true to yourself, I think it's the most important thing we can do. So where can people find you on the interwebs?
Well, let's see. There's my blog, Go Into the Story. The reason it's called that is my youngest son, I was getting ready to write a script the next day, and it was a different kind of story for me. I was a little nervous, and so I was attending his bath. He was not even 3. And I jokingly said to him, hey, your dad's writing a new script tomorrow, and I'm a little nervous about it. You got any advice for me? And he looked up at me immediately and said, go into the story and find the animals. Which I thought was great. So I named my blog Go Into the Story. So it's Go Into the Story. That's on the web. There's also a Twitter feed. Just go Into the Story. There's the Facebook group, Zero Draft 30 Facebook group. You can reach me at DePaul. I'm at the DePaul University School of Cinematic Arts, which is an awesome place. It's growing. We just had a really exciting thing happen where we partnered with the Second City, which is like the premier comedy brand worldwide, because they're here in Chicago. We now offer the only program of its type, a BFA and an MFA in comedy, film writing, and storytelling, filmmaking and storytelling.
Right up your alley.
We have our first cohort coming in this fall. So it's a terrifically exciting school and place to be. So I think that's about it. Those are the main places.
Awesome. Scott, I've really loved this conversation, and I can't wait to share it with the world.
Okay, well, great. I appreciate the time, and best of luck to you and all your ventures too.